Hey y'all, this lesson is on deriving the quadratic formula. So we will be using completing the square, which you might watch my other video before watching this, to derive the quadratic formula. And then hopefully when you use the quadratic formula, it'll make a little more sense as to why the formula is what it is. We're going to start with the standard form of a quadratic function, and that is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And I've got it set equal to 0 because I'm basically wanting to solve for x. When we're using the quadratic formula, we are looking for x-intercepts, so we are solving for x. And I've done the first step here. Now, in my previous video with completing the square, I factored out the a value out front. But for the sake of deriving the quadratic formula, I'm actually going to do it a little bit differently, and I've divided every single term by a. So now we have this new equation where we've divided everything by a, and now I'm just going to follow the same exact steps from completing the square, which means that I am going to have to move the c value over. In this case, it's not c, it's c over a, but that's okay. So I've got this. I need to find a new c value, and I'm moving my old c value over. So this is move c over a. Now I mentioned that I'm going to have to find the new c value. So that is going to entail our formula that we know, and that's where you do b, which in this case is b over a, but our b value is b over a, and we're just pretending like those are numbers. And we're having it, and then we're squaring it. It's going to take a little bit of algebra here. This is going to be inside b over 2a. And then when we square it, we get b squared over 4a squared. So it's a little bit yucky, but hang in there. It gets better, I promise. This is so neat how it turns out. I just love this. I'm going to rewrite my now perfect square trinomial. B over ax plus my new c value. And then I have my right side plus my new c value. We are rewriting our trinomial. Sometimes it helps. This is a proof, or we're deriving something. So it helps when you're deriving something to, on the right side, write what you're doing, so that when you go back and look at it, if there's any mistakes, you can kind of figure out, oh yeah, I remember what I did. I remember why it didn't work. Usually, I make this mistake almost every time. When I move the c value over, I forget the negative, and it messes up the whole thing. So I can always go back and look at what I've done. And now I'm going to factor the left side. And we know that to factor that, it's going to factor into x plus b over 2. And in this case, b over 2 looks like this. So, whoops, b over 2. Now remember, our b value is b over a, so it's b over a over 2, which simplifies to this. So hang in there, I promise. And then the right side, we have negative c over a plus our new c value. All right. Now this right side is a little bit yucky. So I'm going to get a common denominator for this right side. I'm going to leave the left side as is for a second. And then to get a common denominator on this side, it's already got an a. So now all it needs is to be multiplied by 4a so that I have 4a squared in the denominator. So I've got negative 4ac over 4a squared. And then this one has everything it needs, so we're just going to leave it. And then I'm going to add the two fractions now that they have a common denominator. All over 4a squared. Now, if you know the quadratic formula, you're probably starting to see something really familiar, which is just so exciting for me. Look at this. If you know the quadratic formula, then that looks familiar, and that's exciting. And now we have a perfect square trinomial that's been factored, and now we can use our square root property to solve for x. It should start looking a little bit clear to you. I just love this. Square root property. So we square root both sides, and this gets to come out. And then we have the square root of this. Oops, forgot my negative. Be careful with those negatives. Now, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to use the commutative property, which means I can change the order. And I'm going to do the square root of 4a squared is 2a, because I square root 4 and square root a squared. So I'm going to rewrite this. Got my plus or minus. In the numerator, I have b squared minus 4ac. In the denominator, I've got 2a. It's looking good. Now I'm going to solve for x, which is going to involve subtracting b over 2a to isolate x. So I have negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Look at that. I have two fractions with the same denominator. And I can consolidate those. So I have negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the quadratic formula. Isn't that so awesome? I just love this. I think it's so cool. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There is a little memory song that goes with this, and it goes along to Pop Goes the Weasel. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now you can't say I never sang for you. You are welcome. That is all for this, for deriving the quadratic formula. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I would be happy to help.